Hi! Let's talk about Daggerheart and especially this GM move. Uh, this is very unscripted, so sorry if I'm stuttering a lot. I hope my point is getting across. Uh, and also, before I start, this is essentially, I got this idea of this video from a Reddit thread on Daggerheart's forum that spoke about he hated the idea of giving narrative control to the players because what hinders them, like if they decide what they find in the chest, why not giving themselves the best magical artifact ever, or what is the meaning of adventure if they can decide whatever behind the door destroys the whole purpose of the adventure. He hated this idea, and I agree. Like giving too much narrative control to the player, then what's the idea of having a GM in the first place and coming up with this adventure and so on. But at the same time, I disagree with that post because that is not what Daggerheart is trying to do. So essentially, let's go through it. Here's my 4 guidelines on doing this DM move. And the first one is establishing narrative ownership. Daggerheart is very good already mechanically built-in safety tools to establish questions and establishing very clear path on what is ownership. What I mean with this establishing narrative ownership also as well is like, what do I own and responsible in the narration as a GM, and what does the players own in the narration as the players? For me, I can only use this for me as an example. Players own everything that is essentially their characters. They can decide whatever is their house. They can decide how their parents look like, what their job is. They can decide what kind of hobbies their first crush was, their teacher, what it started on. Everything according to their character's backstory, they automatically own, and I will not step part of it. Me as a GM owns everything to make a story interesting, like foes, like and anything that is essentially a surprise. If I overstep that boundary, it's essentially like I'm gambling. If I decide to create a parent figure for that player and they doesn't like it, then I just make this an awful experience. So that is essentially what it is. This is a communication between which is this movie is essentially what I mean is a communication between me as a DM and also the players, like what is going on in the scene. Here is for the scene where I want to go in this direction, and now you're pointing out with the details. So that is like you need as a GM to figure out what do I own, what do my players own, and establish that in the group. It's a good first session here of talk a little bit about this, but essentially, if you feel like I'm overstepping my boundaries, ask: is it okay I create this character? Is it okay if I do this, and so on? And if the players say no, then step back and create something else or ask for inputs. So that is my first guideline. Guideline number 2, doing this GMO, is of course that what I'm always trying to do when I do this GMO is to give more focus on the player's characters. When I prompt any question, it is a prompt and an invitation for the player to put their character in the spotlight. What I mean by this, and for example, I can describe how they find a little box, a treasure chest, and when they open it, sorry, my camera just froze there, and when they open that treasure chest, I can describe me as a GM, say, you find 3 bags of gold and this magical item, but then I can prompt a question. You find something you haven't seen since your childhood, and it brings very nostalgic memories. What is it? For a bard example that opened that box, they can describe, oh, this is a Lothlerian flute. I haven't seen this when I was a child. And now I prompted that player to tell a little bit more about that character's backstory to the other players around the table. And suddenly the spotlight isn't about the magical artifact, it's about that character. And this can be a very powerful tool. Always when you have a guideline, when you always do this GM move, ask yourself, how can I introduce an element that gives more, essentially, information about the player characters? Ask, and how I do it, ask them how they feel, ask them how does it relate to their past, ask them how they react, and so on. Always that's the wrong word, prompt the players to be active, to put their character first in their mind. And suddenly this becomes a very powerful GM tool to get information out of the character. For example, that treasure scene, like the bard open it and says, this is a very same type of flute that I had when I was little. Then I can prompt that in that room, the room next to it, that is a person that coming from his hometown that bought also one set of flute, perhaps even an old colleague of that barn. And suddenly that prompt gives me ideas that I can use for future settings or future concepts. That is so powerful. I cannot tell you how much this intrigues me when I'm at the table to do this GM move and ask that question and get that response from my players. Guideline number 3, create dramas. Use this prompt to create dramas. This can be very hard. Essentially, what helps me to get into the mind is to ask me the question is, what creates a hinder? What creates an obstacle in the scene? Essentially, based on the idea prompt, what does the character want and what cannot have it? And just take what cannot have it part and essentially put it in that prompt to ask, what is an obstacle? What is going on? This could relate to my earlier discussion about the Reddit thread, but let me give you an example of how I would do it. Let's say the players are requested to go into a guard's house, sneak into the guard house to steal something. Let's say a set of keys to the gate so they can open it to the rebels to sneak in. The players are now inside the station, and then I suddenly prompt the rogue character and say, on that table, you're noticing a very familiar sigil, a symbol of something in your past. And on that letter, you're noticing that these guards are not technically they're still owned by the nation, but they are bought by someone. Who is this symbol from, and why does it frighten you? This prompt creates drama. Just creating this feeling, why does this frighten you, and why? And there's a little bit of plot twist that these guards are owned by another gang, essentially prompting me as a GM to ask the player, who is going to be your adversary? Who is going to be your big bad that you want to face? The rogue can easily say, this is a rival syndicate, this is my old gang. Perhaps this is gonna say, oh, this is my parent symbol that you use when they're working. Or perhaps even they're gonna say, no, this is a rival nation symbol. Wherever prompt there is, that creates drama and gives also, again, as guideline number 2 established, a spotlight for that player to say, hey guys, these guards ain't what doesn't seem to be in the mayor's pockets. It seems to be in someone else's pocket. And prompted a scene, a plot twist. For me as a GM, perhaps didn't think about what the plot is going to be, just that it's going to be related to the rogue character. And now I have gotten what I wanted, that my rogue character now feels invested in the side story, and also I know now what frightens that character. So that creates drama, that creates intrigue. So that is my third guideline. Think about what can I create, what can I do to create more dramas. My last guideline, which is number 4, is essentially use this move to create engagement in your players. There is nothing more boring to just sit around and wait for stuff to happen. And if you feel like your players starting to sideline your eyes, starting to open their phones and start fiddling, then it's a perfect moment to prompt that player to give out details. In the quick start adventure, the Sablewood Messengers, that can be downloaded in daggerheart.com, we have a very clear example of it. The woods they're passing through, you're asked to prompt your players about a very specific tree and what makes it special. It has no narration. Sorry, it has no point in the narration. It doesn't matter for the adventure at all. But for the players to have small part of creating something, a small detail in the story, engage that player, forcing them to be active. And this is a perfect thing also, a very low stake risk to put those shy players or players that some doesn't take natural central part doesn't take place in the table, for you to ask those kind of players this question, prompt them to give them details. I mean, essentially, like, it can also be a central part of very much fun interactive. Like, it doesn't have any form of meaning. It doesn't mean anything for your adventure if the players describe their room at the inn. If you give them, you open the door to your room at the inn and you discover that, hey, something unusual that usually not part in a tavern's room. What is it? And let them to describe that a little bit part of, perhaps it's some luxury items, perhaps it's 2 beds, perhaps it's something very, very naughty. Whatever it is, it's a fun prompt to give a little bit flair to the world and let the players be part of the world building. So essentially my guideline number 4 is let the players be part of the world building, just giving a small piece of unnecessarily details to fill in. More or less it's like those old coloring books, right? Like you have the figurine already pointed out and then you ask like, hey, fill out the colors for me, please. It's not that too much hassle. It doesn't give too much narrative control to the players, but it's enough to create engagement and activate the players. My closing word for this GM move is essentially that, like, if doing it right, you create engagement. I'm sorry to repeat that word, but you create engagement, you create making sure they are active and making sure they are staying focused in the adventure. Making sure that always be a part of the discussion. If other people, and also what I see in my tables, when the player get this question, the other people around the table feel, hey, I want to hear what this idea is about because I need to act upon it. And my character needs to be acting upon it. Or they are invested, like, okay, I want to hear that player's mind. I wonder what crazy ideas that come out of it. So it's this GM move is powerful, and I hope my 4 guidelines gives you more tool under your tool belt to make it very special at your table. Thank you so very much. My name is Tommy, And this has been my little bit talk about Daggerheart. Daggerheart. Jesus Christ. I said this was very unscripted.